This is a very detailed conversation with researcher Robert Gouveia, a friend of mine, on the assassination attempt of Donald Trump. I don't think there's anybody online that does a better job than Robert does on digging down into the details and the documents. You're going to learn something here. This episode is brought to you by SaveTheRanchers.com. This is really about saving small businesses. The Corporate Transparency Act is like the Patriot Act on steroids. If you own an LLC, an S-Corp, a PLC, a limited partnership, you will have to give your private information by the end of 2024 to a federal database that will be able to share it with local law enforcement, the IRS, and international agencies and local law enforcement. This law is completely unconstitutional and needs to be stopped. We have a fundraiser for this on August 17th, Saturday, in Springville, Utah, where you can get elite rifle training by Cowboy Tactical for $250. The proceeds go to the legal battle against the Corporate Transparency Act. Utah gubernatorial candidate Phil Lyman will be there. Utah State Treasurer Marlo Oaks will be there. I will be there with my wife. Go to SaveTheRanchers.com. Put in the promo code CWIC, C-W-I-C. Go there now. Here we go. All right, welcome to Cwic Show. My name is Greg Mattson, and I am your host. In this episode, we bring on Rob Gouveia from Watching the Watchers. Rob, welcome to the show.
Greg, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me on.
I have looked online several times, all over on political coverage. I don't think there's anybody working harder than you on this stuff.
Well, that's a nice compliment. I appreciate that. We are spending a lot of time on the documents. We're covering it pretty in detail. I know there was a big flurry of excitement when it first happened, obviously. There was a lot of eyeballs and attention on it. But then I think the real juicy stuff comes after the fact, because that's when the investigations start to turn stuff up and we get to start to compare and contrast the new statements with the prior statements. And we're seeing a lot of that. And that's really where you start to tease out where the problems are and see where the cover up is occurring and get some truth. So we're staying on it. We know a lot of senators are digging in on it. Chuck Grassley, Ron Johnson. So we're following them intently. There's a bunch of investigations that are opening up as well. And so I think we're going to learn a lot, and I'm hopeful that we learn more of the truth. I know a couple of senators are digging into it, but there is a big effort to cover this up and just move beyond it.
Yeah, there's no question there's some type of a cover-up. It may not be fully conspiracy theory land, but it is definitely a CYA type of a thing, without a doubt. What I'd like to do is kind of break this up during the day and what's going on during the day, starting with a morning meeting at 9 a.m., right? There's a morning meeting that's being held. It's supposed to be between local law enforcement and Secret Service, I believe. Secret Service does not show up, right? Do we know why they didn't show up?
Well, I don't know much why they did much of anything that day. There was a lot of finger pointing that happened after the fact. And I think that there's conflicting timelines. So one of the best timelines that I've seen here is from Ron Johnson. And the problem with this is that we don't have a real crystal timeline from the Secret Service that we can compare and contrast these with. So we've got the media that is reporting dates and times and stuff, how stuff happened. We have the local cops who are giving us details about what happened and when. And then we have the Secret Service that are giving us details about what happened and when. And we're starting to now see the discrepancies between the stories. And so Ron Johnson was one senator who put together a compendium of a lot of this stuff. And in his timeline, he walks us through a bunch of stuff that happened even the day before and the day of. And I'm looking at it right now. I don't see anything. I don't know that we have a definitive explanation from the Secret Service as to why they did not show up. I think that their excuse would be that it was not needed, or that they'd already communicated about what the plan was, and so it just wasn't a necessity, as far as I know.
Did this cause any issues, though, with their absence at this meeting? Did this cause any issues with the radio communication, for example, where there would have been perhaps some, corroboration on how are we going to communicate on what channels are we going to be on, et cetera?
So that was supposed to be remedied by having two people in the command center, a unified command center that would bring together the local forces and the Secret Service forces. They do have different radios, and there was a lot of communication and testimony about that in front of Congress and elsewhere about why these miscommunications happened. But the solution to this had already been remedied, basically. And the local cops explained that the reason they do this is to solve communication problems. But the way it works is there's one person from the local cops in the command center. There's one person from the Secret Service in the command center. Because their radios are not directly interspersible, they can't combine their systems. They just communicate verbally. So the theory is that as soon as local cops know something is awry, they're all spreading it around on their radios. But that person in real time is in the same building, in the same command center as the Secret Service. So the local cop just communicates that to the Secret Service. It's as though they're on the same radio with maybe, a second delay to process those things. And the Secret Service hears what they're saying and communicates it back to their circle. And we communicate in that manner. So I don't know if that morning meeting, if attendance at that morning meeting would have changed that dynamic in any way, but it seems like a solution that had already been in place, that they were going to have at least one person in the command center so that they could communicate and liaison that way.
Yeah, that's going to bring up a couple of questions later on then. Would this have anything to do with who's covering the roof at all? Is that already designated? That's already set? The Secret Service has already set their perimeter, a very tight perimeter. Did the meeting have anything to do with this?
So we're flying a little bit blind on that. I have seen a copy because we don't have the Secret Service's ultimate response to a lot of this. They're still in the middle of a pending investigation. The FBI is in the middle of their investigation. What we've seen from the local police, and they have released a full actual PowerPoint presentation of basically the security details, the security plan. And if you look at it, there are different buildings that are marked, and they have different zones that are marked off. And so there's, very curiously, on some of these, the actual AGR building is not marked off in the zones. It's like they took an aerial photograph and they just started carving it up, right? You zoom out on a Google map, you just say, okay, Secret Service, you're over here. Local cops, you're here. We're putting the medical team over here. Entryways this way. They just carve it all up. One building that is not carved out of that is the AGR building. And the question is, I guess, why that occurred. In the local police security plan, in their detail that they were presumably reviewing that day, they do show that there were two counter snipers that were local counter snipers in one end of the building. So the shooter was on this other end, and there were supposedly two snipers that were stationed in that second room or in that building. Now, there is some discrepancies about whether they were on the second floor or the first floor, and whether one left their station or both left their station. But the Secret Service came back out and was basically saying that they were in charge of that building. Now, they reversed themselves on this as well. So this is the Secret Service is kind of blaming the cops and then walking that back. So the Secret Service, I think, can point to the local cops and say, well, there were snipers in the building, because there were snipers in the building, and the local cops have now confirmed that. But the local cops have responded, and they're forcefully defending themselves, and I'm glad that they're doing this. But they're saying that their perspective from their assignments simply did not cover the roof, because if you look at the construction of the building, their rifles and their viewpoints should be set inward from the window, like they're not hanging their head out the window and having a big 180 degree, let's say, range of motion or range of view. They can only see just a very narrow window, and they're looking where people are coming in to the rally. They're not actually supposed to be kind of in an overwatch position, scouring a big range. It's just a narrow focus on a very narrow area. So
those that are inside the building, then, Rob, they're not even focused on the building itself. There's no focus on there's no focus on the building itself, other than perhaps, I don't know, the snipers that are on the other building. They seem to already be pointing in that general direction.
Right. Yeah. And that's the theory, is that these guys, from their take, the local cops are saying that our job was only to watch basically the entry. Okay, we're seated in the windows. We're watching people come through the front. So if there's a problem there, that's what we're covering. And it's not our job to be monitoring the rooftops everywhere else, because that's what the other snipers are there for, and that's where the Secret Service is there. Now, and we saw that. We even saw that in most of the footage, where those other two snipers looked like they were looking directly at where the shooter was. And from our perspective, it was hard to tell, and there's some reports that there was a tree in the way, which is why maybe they couldn't see him so clearly. And one of the snipers, if you watch that in super slow motion, the counter snipers, he, kind of raises his head up, resets, and then gets back down to fire down range. And again, we don't even think that that team was the one who took the shot because maybe they couldn't see it, but it was another sniper team that was on the opposite roof. So the Secret Service, though, blamed the local cops. Okay, Ronald Rowe, who testified very recently, Kimberly Cheadle resigned, and we can dig into all of that, but he testified and he blamed those local snipers. He actually printed out these poster boards and brought them in, all these colored poster boards, and said, look at what they could see. But if you look at the poster boards that he dragged in front of Congress, this is the new Secret Service acting director, it's like they stuck the phone out the window to take the picture. And he said there during testimony, he said, why didn't they just look left, blaming these counter snipers? Like, why didn't they just look over there? They could have seen him. They could have done something about it. But that was not their perspective at all.
Okay, real quick. So the counter snipers, because I did see on their backs, they've got SWAT on the backs of their uniforms. Are those local enforcement then? Those two snipers that are on the other roof?
On the other roof, so behind Trump. So Trump was in the center stage. There was one building directly behind him, and then there were on either side. So if Trump's here, and the crowd is down here, there were two, I think, barns up here. One counter sniper on each team, counter Secret Service sniper teams on each barn. The other snipers that were the local counter snipers were in the building where the shooter was.
Yeah.
So he was on the roof of their building. One of the snipers apparently saw the guy, took a picture of him, sent it back down to command. So as the shooter was crawling around the exterior of the building, a local sniper takes a picture of this guy. Apparently they'd already identified him as having a rangefinder, already was suspicious. There were multiple identification moments before Trump ever took the stage that they should have intervened in here, but they didn't.
So real quick then. So the snipers that are on each of the barns, those are Secret Service snipers.
That's what we believe, yes.
Okay, so if those are Secret Service snipers, they're the ones that have the direct side of the roof of the shooter.
Correct.
So how can they be blaming local law enforcement if those snipers are set up specifically to cover that roof?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think the local police and the local law enforcement are asking themselves the same things because they didn't have that perspective. And so they released their own images of what they saw, and it was very narrow. And they're like, we were not assigned to cover that roof. Our job was to look directly at the entry. We presumed, just as you suggested, Greg, that the other snipers would have that roof covered. It clearly wasn't covered, so now it's the finger pointing game. Now the local cops the Secret Service are blaming the local cops, and they're not responsible.
So there were two statements that were made earlier on from Director Cheadle. One was the slope was too steep, and I didn't want anybody to get hurt. Okay. Number one, why does she care about how steep the slope is? Is she an oversight over the law enforcement if they're the ones that are in charge of the building? And why is she the one telling the local law enforcement how whether or not it's safe and whether they should be on the building or not? Number two, what was stated was that the local law enforcement said it was too hot, so they went down and went inside the building.
Yeah, and I think both of those are just part of a weak cover-up attempt to try to get misinformation to change the narrative out there before the truth really takes hold. It's simple excuses. It's like the dog ate my homework. Everybody was mocking that. We also saw, I think Representative Garcia, I think is his name, from Texas. Guy's like 70 something years old. He walked up there, was, doing cartwheels on the roof practically. And it was, I think, just to try to diminish attention off of the Secret Service. I thought it was a pretty boneheaded PR move. Everybody responded immediately that was asinine, but they didn't want to accept responsibility. So it's almost like this knee-jerk reaction. It's this they can't help themselves. No, the roof was sloped or it was too hot. And the local cops are pushing back on that as well. No, we would have been on the roof if it was hot, right? We're not children or something like this. Like we're trained professional counter sniper teams. We know what we're doing. And it's basically insulting, but they had no other explanation at the time. So they're just trying to kick it back to someone else.
Yeah. So a couple of other points here that are happening before, and I don't know if I know all the information that's happening beforehand, but apart from the meeting at 9 a.m., I think that there was another communication that actually came from the parents somewhere. Where did that communication go to, and what did they say?
The parents, I don't know if they communicated during the event or prior to the event. I could be wrong about that. I don't recall seeing that timeline. Like, I don't see or haven't seen evidence, I could be
Okay.
missing it, about the parents like warning the cops or something like that. I haven't seen that come into the official timelines yet.
Okay. So beforehand, though, there are local witnesses that are there. And many of us have already seen the camera footage of the phone footage of they see crooks up on the roof.
Yeah.
They say, hey, that guy's got a gun. They're telling local law enforcement, I believe it's local law enforcement, that they're talking to. One of the local law enforcement guys actually gets up on the ladder, goes up, sees him. Crooks turns and points his gun at him.
Yep.
He comes back down. How early is that compared to when the shots are fired from Crooks to Trump? And where did the communication go? If you've got a command center, is that radio from that guy going to the guy in the command center? Is it getting relayed to the Secret Service?
Yeah, such a great question. And we were waiting to see what this timeline looked like. And it seems like it's very, very close, very, very close in time between when the officer, he actually was, I think, pulling himself up. Somebody else was boosting him up onto the roof and then fell off the roof, hurt himself, radioed it in. And it's basically simultaneous. Like as that's happening, the shooter's resetting and firing shots downrange, basically within the minute. Very, very close in time. Because I was asking the same question that you were asking. If the guy falls off the roof, the local cop falls off the roof and knows that there is a gun there, like that, at that moment, we now know there's someone on the roof, shouldn't be there. That's one. Has a gun, shouldn't be there, and is adverse to law enforcement because he just pointed it at some law enforcement's head. Not supposed to happen, right? So it's like a unequivocal, 100% a threat. Something should have been done, I would say, at that moment. So how much time elapsed between that realization and the shots? Very, very quick. And that's where Ron Johnson's timeline really, I think, is instructive because it closes that gap for us. Now, that being said, I don't think that that's necessary in order to show that there was catastrophic failure or even intentional failure. I think that was just the final moment of an impending catastrophe, but a competent Secret Service or law enforcement that was actually doing their job, that was actually properly armed up and resourced in order to address this, would have caught this many times before. I mean, the guy came in with a rangefinder. They had him on their eyes for 90 minutes before the shots were fired, and they lost him. Okay, so local cops and Secret Service apparently both lost the guy. But for 90 minutes, they knew he was concerning. They had already identified way before
suspicious.
Yeah, suspicious, right? Didn't see him with a gun early, but they saw him with a rangefinder. And then one of the local snipers, I think there were 3 guys in a building. One guy had to leave at 4 because they were short-staffed. Secret Service was short-staffed. They were leaning on the local cops to bring their teams out. Local cops were short-staffed. And one of the local snipers left at 4. As he was leaving, he walks out the front door of that AGR building and he sees Thomas Crooks, the shooter, seated there on a bench. And he says, hey, this guy just watched me come out with my gear, my rifle and my weapons, and texts the other snipers about it, right, at that moment. And that was, I think, 90 minutes before they brought Trump out. So that's number one. They saw him with a rangefinder, number 2. They then took a photo of him, kind of mulling around outside of the building. One of the local cops took that picture, sent it out to the rest of the team.
5:14. It's about an hour before the shots are taken.
Yeah. And that continues to transpire. Apparently, what happens between then and the shots, I think, still kind of messy. But he is lost. He climbs back on the roof, gets set up, points his gun at the local cop, falls off the roof, and then shots are fired. So
there's a possibility the Secret Service knows about this guy. They definitely know about him. The local law enforcement know about him, but they don't know where he is.
Yeah.
And then whether or not we know about that law enforcement communication where he got up on the roof, fell back down, we don't know exactly when that happened yet. There may not have been any communication of, hey, this guy's on the roof and he's got a direct line of sight.
Yeah, it's a good question. We don't know. So we don't know what the Secret Service knows because they don't have any of their recorded communications. They've already confirmed that to us, that everything is gone. They didn't preserve any of that. So reconstructing a timeline from their perspective is...
They didn't preserve any of it?
No audio recordings at all were recorded.
In other words, they were wiped.
They didn't say that they were wiped, but they were saying that they do not have them. So I don't know if Congress, it's so frustrating when they bring these people in to testify. I'm like, can you please ask 50 questions about that one question about, did you not ever record them? Were they recorded and then deleted? Is this a 24-hour deletion rule, or were they all off? Who made that decision? But no, there's no audio. There's no recordings. They weren't wearing body cameras. So no one can trace back ultimately what happened. And they've told us that. Cheadle said there were no recordings, and Rowe said that there were no recordings. So we're relying on a reconstruction of what the local cops said and how it happened from their perspective and the media reports. Otherwise, the Secret Service is just this black box. And this is not new for them. Okay, they've done this many times. They already did this after January 6th. We have like one text message from the entire aftermath of January 6th. And so you should, if you're the Secret Service and you had an archival problem after January 6th, maybe you should start archiving stuff. Maybe this stuff is important because Congress wants to have access to these records. And they didn't. It's just gone. It's a black box.
Maybe that's why it's not there, because it's important.
It's right. Exactly right. Because they don't want you to see what happened there.
Yeah. So here's another question then, Rob. You've got, you've seen the footage. I've seen the footage. You've got those two snipers right next to each other. One's got a stand. One's freestanding there. You do see that, you hear the shot. You see the sniper kind of step up, come back down, get his sights on, and boom, right? They seem to have a direct line of sight to the roof.
Yeah.
Why do they not see him? There's two of them.
It's a good question.
Just on that barn, there's two of them. Why do they not have a direct line of sight to the roof? Or at least if they've got, I should say it this way, you said there might be a tree there, but they've got a direct line of sight to the roof. Why do they not see him? Because the slope, as you know, is, what is it, 9%? It's not like he's down below this barrier, right, where you can't see him very well. It is almost flat.
Right.
And so it would be impossible for them not to be able to see him pretty clearly, it seems to me.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I think there were two there. So even if you had that tree excuse, say, okay, well, there's a tree there, they couldn't see that one half of the building. That's a security failure. Okay, somebody should have eyes on the building. Otherwise, whoever did the planning failed to prepare appropriately. That's your failure. But the other team, I don't know where they were looking. And they might have been short teams too. I mean, there's conversations about them being short staffed because they moved. Senator Chuck Grassley came out with a letter and he was saying that I think Jill Biden that same day was speaking to, I think, 300 Italians somewhere. And she had 11 post standers that were there assigned from the Secret Service. A whistleblower reached out to Chuck Grassley's office, and Trump only had 3, according to these documents that were forwarded to him. So they may have just been short-staffed, underprepared, intentionally deficient, something like that. But once they heard the shots, I mean, they sighted him up pretty quick. I took him out with one shot. So somebody could see him very clearly. They just weren't maybe looking that direction, maybe thinking that someone else had it covered, or maybe the other team had it covered. But regardless, I think they were on notice for a very long time, especially around that building, right? Someone sent them a picture of that guy crawling around outside of the building. So there should have been eyes on that building. There should have been, we lost a suspect. We've lost somebody. Keep eyes on this area until we reacquire him. So it's very curious how they were just, I was joking about it on our show about they're ordering DoorDash or whatever, playing their, video games on their phone or something to allow it to happen. But they got eyes on it quickly. They had noticed that there was a problem over there, and they still weren't looking.
Well, the other thing is notifying President Trump. I mean, did they notify him of this? Was he going to go on at 6 and he waited another 5 minutes and then he overrode them and said, no, I'm just going? Or, was there any communication to him or his team about this suspicious individual that they were looking for? Because it seems to me like, why would you put somebody out in the open like that?
Yes.
When you've got someone who, they've got a rangefinder. And you've known about them for an hour and a half.
Yep. Right. And multiple people have flagged him, and Trump has said specifically that he would have waited. He did an interview after this. He says, I would have waited 5 minutes. He didn't know. No, there was no reports that he said, I'm overriding you or anything like that. He says, they keep me waiting all the time. It's weather. It's other stuff that happens. It's no problem. And it wasn't that long, right? It's 5 minutes, 6 minutes. and he could have easily waited. The one officer was already climbing up on the roof. They could have just waited another 2 minutes and probably would have had the guy, but they didn't. And the question is why?
Now, what about part of the team that's covering this? If they've got a diversion of resources that have gone over to Jill Biden and they're short-staffed, they're using then Homeland Security, right? HSI individuals.
Yep.
Are they pulling them in? Were they in as part of the whole team? Did they understand a week in advance or a day in advance even of what this looked like, what was going on? What are the precautions we need to be focused on? Where are the weaknesses of the perimeter? Anything else that these guys focus on? Would they have been briefed or had the time to really know what was going on and what they ought to be looking for?
Yeah, it's a great question. There's a lot of, I think, complications in this area about resources and staffing and how that all worked. And the Secret Service has been very not forthcoming about who was responsible for these things. And Ronald Rowe, the new acting director, he came out and he testified in front of Congress. Nobody's even on leave. Nobody's even been fired. Everybody's just kind of carrying on as normal. And I guess they think they did a great job, but the review, he says, is still ongoing, and they haven't given us names or details about who is involved in what. But the general story is, right, these whistleblowers are coming out. So Josh Hawley is another senator who's gotten some good contact from other people who are saying that Ronald Rowe, this new acting director, himself was responsible for pulling back on the resources for the Trump campaign and the Trump team. In other words, Trump, one example of this is, why did they not use a drone on the site in Butler? Apparently it was on at least somebody's inventory list saying that we were going to have a drone operator on the menu, right? They say, okay, we're going to need 2 snipers, we're going to need 2 post staffers, we're going to need 1 drone operator, 1 comms guy, whatever. So they had him on the itinerary to be there. Then they didn't have a drone. The shooter flew a drone around, but our own Secret Service didn't fly a drone around. Yeah. The local cops offered them a drone, but they still didn't do that. And others, like I think Dan Bongino said that he was hearing from others who were saying that the Secret Service snipers were only allowed to go to rallies and things like that if it was within driving distance of DC. And there were some other, kind of internal regulations that maybe are not codified anywhere, but that just tend to minimize the security for Trump and in favor of other people. And there was another story, I think, that the person who actually did the planning and the preparation of this event was also just a total, kind of B-level person who is not qualified to do this stuff. And it's that kind of pattern that we see over and over again. But they don't want to give us a lot of details on it. Even Senator Hawley was digging in with Ronald Rowe. He says, I know who that was. Like, I know who did that. So we're going to find this out. I know why these decisions were made. So you can be forthcoming now, but they're circling the wagons trying to protect their people.
Speaking about qualifications, as you look at the team and you watch what's going on as they cover them up and then they move them over to the, what was the name of the SUV they called it? I can't remember, but the second SUV that they were going to use. And they move them over there, they get them in, and then you've got, and it has nothing to do with whether these women are, whether they're women or female or whatever else, but there's 3 women that are outside the SUV that look like they are deers caught in the headlights. I mean, again, when you talk about why are these individuals, they obviously do not have the training on this, because it's not that they're women. They are not trained to do exactly this. It is very, very obvious. And yet these are the people that are on the team here to protect President Trump, right?
Right.
Are these DHS individuals, do we know, or the Department of Homeland Security?
Yeah, I don't know specifically about those individuals, but I did see there were some interesting pins and stuff on them that people were saying they were not Secret Service, that they might have been HSI, which is a division of Homeland Security. And that would not be strange at all, because Homeland Security investigations is everywhere. They were all over January 6th. They're all over this. And they're like Mayorkas's and Homeland's little police force in a way that evades a lot of scrutiny, because everybody focuses on the FBI. It's a wild thing. And I don't know why Congress hasn't caught on to this little scam yet, but it's always the FBI. They're dragging the FBI in here. What do your agents know? And, and this one has been about the Secret Service and the FBI. Nobody's asking about HSI and who these people are. But
because the FBI is only focused on crooks, right? I mean, they're looking at the crime. They're focused on the investigation of crooks.
Yeah, right. they're not going to investigate the Secret Service for any criminality or for any intentional negligence or any negligence at all. They're just going to just say, nope, we're just making sure that he's a nice lone actor. Nobody else was involved in his encrypted chats that he was having with Lord knows who. No social media presence other than maybe some posts on Gab. It's a very strange thing, but they're just feeling like the cleanup crew. They're not going to investigate anybody who was responsible for any of this stuff at the Secret Service.
Yeah. We had Director Cheadle resign, which she should have done. Have there been any other firings since then? Anybody else lost their job?
No, not one, as far as we know. And Ronald Rowe was the person who came in and testified about that. And he says that, the investigation's ongoing. He's not going to release any names. He's standing by their people, which is, I think, standard for the government. I mean, we ask ourselves about what are the repercussions? Who's going to be held accountable for this? And when the government is responsible for the wrongdoing, it's very difficult to get them to be held responsible for it. And so we just ask ourselves practically, I mean, who's going to investigate anything in the Secret Service? The Secret Service is going to have to investigate themselves, and they'll do that. They'll find they did nothing wrong. We'll have an office of an inspector general, maybe from Homeland, do an investigation. He's not going to, fire anybody or make any recommendations. Congress is not going to pull money from them in any way. In fact, they'll probably give them more money. So if they just batten down the hatches, I think Cheadle was a nice scapegoat. She made it very easy. I've never seen anything quite like that, where James Comer and Jamie Raskin, one Republican, one Democrat, who absolutely, I mean, on TV, it looks like they hate each other. I don't know behind closed doors, but these two guys never agree on anything. And I think it is personal. But they both signed a document agreeing that Cheadle needs to go. Cheadle goes. Congress now has a scapegoat. So now they can just point their finger over to her and say, oh, we got our pound of flesh. We've got, our person is now done. And the rest of the investigation can kind of just limp on, and they'll find, I'm sure, stuff that is going to make their institution not look nearly as bad as it is.
Where does that investigation go from here? Are there going to be continued hearings? How long do they go for? What do you think that there's a specific goal for Congress on trying to get specific information? Because it seems like mostly in these hearings, what they're really trying to do is get the information out to the public, right? It's like, okay, these are online. We see, everybody sees these things. We get the clips on YouTube, et cetera. Yeah. Do they have any other specific objective, and what can they actually accomplish in a hearing? It's not a court of law.
Yeah, it's a good question. And I think people are trying to figure that out right now. So there's a couple of things that are happening right now. The Democrats are obviously in charge of the Senate. So they have not formulated any Senate task force or anything like that that's investigating this. But a couple of Republican senators on the important committees are looking into it. And they've demanded, the Democrats control a lot of the committees. So they're not going to be, I think, looking too hard at this, since it's their people. It's their Secret Service. It's their Homeland Security. It's their Attorney General right now. So I don't think that they're interested in really getting any answers. I think that they're satisfied that Cheadle's gone. They keep defaulting to this is political violence, and Trump's a political violently person. So I think they're pretty much satisfied with this being done and over and concluded. And that's that. Now, the House of Representatives is a lot more animated. They have created a task force. So we're calling it the J13 task force, the J13th committee, which is the real committee, because this was, of course, an attack on an American presidential candidate. So it's the real J13 committee, and it was created by Speaker Johnson. And I think I have the actual numbers, but yeah, 13 members are going to be on this committee. So it's going to be almost like a January 6th committee with a lot less fanfare and a lot less propaganda behind it, and a lot less media enthusiasm, where Liz Cheney's doing her little Hollywood productions once a week, every week for 2 months, frying our brain cells. So it's going to be, I think, the same thing-ish, 13 members. We've got 7 Republicans who are going to be on it, and 6 Democrats are going to be on it. And, the makeup of the body, I don't know that I have a strong opinion on it. For the Republicans, the only people I really recognize that stand out would be Clay Higgins. He's from Louisiana. He's on there. He was really good on some of the January 6th stuff. He was talking about, the FBI HSI vans that were transporting people to the Capitol and stuff like that. So he digs into stuff. And Laurel Lee from Florida, she's also on there. She's pretty good. She seems like she's a fighter, wants to get, some truth. Democrats, we've got Jared Moskowitz. He's also from Florida. You know him. And they're going to be on there looking to, I guess, get to the bottom of it. So they do have subpoena power, which will be very interesting. So they can send subpoenas just like Liz Cheney did and demand answers from people. But we're demanding answers from the government, right? And the government always just covers it up. So what Liz Cheney and Benny Thompson were doing is they were sending letters to Steve Bannon, who's not in the government anymore, or Peter Navarro, who's not in the government anymore, like private citizens. And then when they don't comply with a fake subpoena, which is what Liz Cheney's subpoena was, because J6 committee was unconstitutional. Just very quickly, HR 503 created the January 6th Select Committee. It said that there needed to be a certain number of members on there. I believe it was 13, 8 Republicans, 5 Republicans, 8 Democrats. They didn't do that. So they only had 7 Democrats and 2 Republicans, and they just fixed the entire committee. So it's entirely unlawful, but I digress on that every time I can. But that is not happening here. We now have 7 and 6 for the total of 13. And I'm hopeful we'll have some hearings. I'm hopeful we'll have some good evidence. I'm hopeful that we'll get some use of the subpoena power. But unlike Liz Cheney, this is going, most of these subpoenas will be going to government, to the Secret Service and to Homeland. And so they'll just say it's, a national security secret or an ongoing investigation or sources and methods. And I have a feeling that Congress and the Republicans,
documents, very
exactly
redacted
right.
documents, etc.
Exactly. And then Congress will come out and say, oh, we understand, right? Just like Mike Johnson did when they were trying to renew FISA. Oh, we understand. Secret Service is very important, and we'll see if we get anything out of it. But at least they're going to have a committee. I have some criticisms over it because it feels like they're gobbling this up from some other very active people. Like there's a representative, Eli Crane, who's ex, Navy SEAL, military, Jason Bourne, badass guy, and he is digging into it. And now this is going to kind of take that away from him. It's going to kind of say, this is the House investigation. You guys can't do what you need to do. This is ours now. So we'll see where it goes.
Yeah. Well, one of the reasons I wanted to cover this, it's not just the event itself. It is the cover up. It is, we're in the U.S. right now. We have, and in the West, we have lost so much faith in the institutions, all of the institutions, right? It's government, it's education, it's law, it's a big business, it just goes on and on and on because there's always these cover-ups and it seems to always be against the will of the people.
Right.
And here is just another cover-up that just, when you watch these hearings, Rob, it's like they don't give any information. Right. They stall on everything. Who knows when they send these documents back to these congressmen that are asking for them? I mean, they may never get them. I don't know.
Right.
It's just constant. And when it's just right on display and you watch it and you think, this is my government, right? Nothing's being accomplished here. It's all CYA everywhere.
Yeah.
This just adds fuel to the fire on this idea of why trust your representatives? Why trust the government when they're acting like this? You're not going to get any answers.
Right. And they actually get mad at people asking questions. They say, how dare you criticize us? The Secret Service and the DOJ, they come out, Merrick Garland, they call us dangerous for questioning what they're doing. And that's our obligation as citizens, is to question them. So it is, I think, a very strange merry-go-round that we're on. And I don't think it's going to stop anytime soon. As you were saying, they're destroying the institutions. I think that they're doing this intentionally so that they can recreate them in their own image. And Trump has been a big catalyst on this, right? They have half the country that is so petrified of Trump that they are now enabling criminal prosecutions of presidential candidates during an American election. It's third world banana stuff, but they're so animated and so, I think, far removed from the old American constitutional ideals that they're willing to break this. They're willing to break glass in case of emergency. They were trying to throw him off the ballot in multiple states in the middle of an election. And they were very close to doing that. Very close. They did it in 2 states until the Supreme Court had to step in and correct the record on that. And so we're going to continue to face this. I think that it is, I think, awakening a lot of people to the truth about our institutions when they will say that they're pursuing justice and then clearly create double standards. We see that Trump had his residence raided by the FBI. We saw criminal prosecutions for fake fraud charges in New York. Fani Willis was grifting, hundreds of thousands of dollars off the Georgia taxpayers just to weaponize the justice system. And so the justice system, I think, is on the ropes. And when that's on the ropes, if you don't have a justice system that's functional, the rest of society slowly starts to diminish and evaporate around it. And the Secret Service and the DOJ and the FBI, they have a history of this. And I think that at this moment, we're kind of at that tipping point. The reasons our institutions have power is because the people find them to be credible and legitimate. If we do not think that they're credible and legitimate, they lose power. And the only way that they can maintain control is by then becoming dictatorial and totalitarian. And so I think we're at that kind of that tipping point where they're recognizing that their credibility is now evaporating. And so they're going all in. They're burning the ships. They're just going to seize power no matter what. They'll prosecute their political opponents. They'll throw them off the ballots. They'll raid their houses, take pictures of their wives' and sons' bedrooms, even though that prosecutor was illegal. Jack Smith, it was not even lawfully appointed, right? It's a fake prosecutor prosecuting fake charges, raiding a president in this country. And then when all this stuff doesn't work to take away their political opponent, things escalate. Suddenly, Trump gets shot in the head. And my question is, right, the Secret Service and the DHS and FBI, all these agencies have had an actual vendetta against Trump for ages. Why is this not the natural evolution of that? And I think hopefully the American people are watching this unfold, and they're going to be very animated about it in November.
Well, whether or not there is something nefarious from the inside, an inside job on all of this, to act the way that they have, knowing that everybody has an assumption that, oh, wow, now they're going after him, really going after him.
Yeah.
You would think they would feel the responsibility to offer clarity to everyone and make sure they understand that if this is not the case, that, hey, we did fail on this. And not only did we fail, but here's where we failed. Here's what happened. Here was the breakdown, and be very, very clear on everything. And they haven't. And here's who needs to be fired, right? Here's who needs to go. And we take responsibility, and we're not going to let this happen again. I haven't even heard somebody say that. We're not going to let this happen again, and here's why. Here's what we're going to do to change.
Right. They have to change. Yeah, they have to change. That's the problem. I think they're just trying to chalk this up as a mistake, as something that just got by them. And I'm really hopeful that Congress doesn't allow that to happen. I mean, I would like to look back. There was a considerable change. I don't know if you saw this, but Trump got shot, right? I think 3 days later, he comes out at the RNC. And his team, as you mentioned, was suddenly very, very different, right? There's all these like 6'5" mega bros out there surrounding him at the RNC, like no one's getting by, right? And so something shifted in the agency. But my question is not just about the J13th assassination attempt. It's about all of those other events. How underprepared were all of these other events so that something like this could just happen, right? Maybe it wasn't even on this one, but there was just this slow watering down of the security so that something like this could be enabled over years, right? And all you need is one. It's just one of those things. Just create an environment. You just need one. And so they did it. And I think, Congress will probably try to not do that, not try to question the entire entity or the entire structure. But Congress is very ineffective, largely. I mean, they could defund these agencies. They actually have power. They don't need to just sit around and send letters all day whining about stuff and bringing truth to the public. I love that. I love that we get to see some of this stuff, but just defund these people. Just take their money away and they'll comply. They'll show up there and they'll come respond. But
it's interesting. A number of these guys and women are attorneys. You think they'd have some understanding of how to apply pressure and what are the consequences here and how do I battle this? But I don't know. I mean, I know it's not a court of law, but there are certain principles that I would think would apply here, though you understand what questioning is and how to get an answer from somebody.
You'd think that Congress would have an interest in this. I mean, it's a separation of powers issue, right? Congress is kind of ineffective and emasculated in many ways unless it throws its elbows around a little bit. And if the executive branch can just thumb their noses at Congress and we're not going to give you those letters, we're not going to show up, we're whatever, right? I think they subpoenaed Merrick Garland, right? And he says, I'm not coming over there. And they're not even going to prosecute him or hold him in contempt. So he can the executive branch snubs their noses at Congress in this administration all the time. And Congress just sits there and takes it. It's
the executive branch is a problem. That's actually an episode I'm doing next week. It's the power, the policies, the regulations that are put in place by the executive branch and all its departments far outweigh what Congress does in law. And yet there are penalties and fines assigned to a number of these executive branch policies and regulations. You know, Title IX as an example. It's all over the place. It acts like law.
Yep.
Right. It's got all the characteristics of law, consequences, et cetera, that go along with it. That's another discussion. I want to get real quick back to before I get to the shooter, I have one more question for you on the actual on the assassination attempt. When you watch the video, the first shot looks like it's the first shot that actually hits Trump in the ear.
Yeah.
Right. He turns his head just slightly, gets the ear instead of the head. There are two more quick shots afterward where he is still standing.
Yeah.
Right. He drops right after the third shot. He drops down. I wonder why, because he didn't really move much. I wonder why he didn't get hit. Do we know where those second and third shots went?
Well, I think, right. I mean, right behind him, I think were those two. And I don't know if one of the other two hit anybody or not. But I noticed the same thing. Yeah, I think we're still trying to trace the trajectory of all the bullets. And I don't know if it was the first volley of 3 or the second volley of 5 that actually hit people. But I do recall what you're saying, that Trump.
Yeah, and on that end, that would be the FBI,
3.
right? The FBI is going to be investigating that portion of it, especially.
Yes, I would imagine they are. They're going to consider him to be Crooks to be the criminal and the other people to be the victims, and so they'll do a reconstruction to see where those all ended up. And I think there was another round that ended up in, I think, one of the hydraulic cranes and hit that, and that also sounded like a gunshot, but it was actually just one of the hydraulic lines bursting.
Is that what causes the water to come out, the pressure?
I think that was a bullet. Yeah.
Oh, that was a bullet that hit that thing.
I think it was a bullet. Yeah.
I remember the camera turning us on one camera view that turned toward that hydraulic, whatever it was, and then all this water is just spraying out. Yeah,
I'm pretty sure that was a bullet, is what people were saying. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Finishing up here with the shooter. Now, we've already talked about all these security lapses with Secret Service and local law enforcement, but how does this kid accomplish this? I mean, this guy's, I call him a kid. Is he 20?
I believe he's 20. Yeah.
He's 20 years old. He's walking into, I don't know how many thousands of people are there, how much security is there. He walks in with an AR-15 style rifle, gets on a roof, eludes security for an hour and a half, apparently.
Yep.
And then hits the president with a bullet.
Yeah, I know. When you have an entire Secret Service operation there to stop it, it seems like it's insane almost. It's almost too easy. How did that happen? But you're exactly right. He's 20. Very weird stuff with him and the family, right? Some people have tried to talk to the family. Apparently his parents are both counselors. I've seen a bunch of different conversations with people alleging to be classmates and things like that. But to be perfectly honest with you, I have not found them credible. What the other so-called students are talking about, they just seem like they're just kind of talking, not really saying a lot, just kind of talking like, some kid might want to if you're in front of a camera. But we don't know much about him. There is reports that he had conversations on encrypted apps. The FBI has said that clearly. They have found some social media profiles. I think it was FBI Director Wray saying that he had something like 700 social media posts, but we haven't seen most of those. There is one online platform called Gab, which Andrew Torba runs, and he released an actual letter that came, I believe it was from the FBI, an emergency disclosure request saying, can you please give us access to this person's account because we think it was crooks, basically. And so they found, I think, 9 different posts that seemed like that they were leaning Democrat. He was kind of criticizing people who were challenging Biden's immigration policy and stuff like that. But aside from that, nobody really knows much about the guy. He's 20. You'd think somebody who's highly politically active or motivated enough to go try to shoot a political candidate would have some other things to say about this on an online profile or something somewhere, and that other people would...
Or to someone.
Or someone, right? Somebody would come out and tell us a little bit more about this. But it is very strange that he was able to evade multiple snipers for 90 minutes and get on the roof. I mean, people were screaming that he was on the roof for at least a minute. People, as he was running across the rooftop, people screaming up there.
You know, Rob, there's also an account, and I think it's in the video. I can't remember if it's in the video here. There is a woman, I believe, that yells right before the shot, "He's got a gun."
Yeah.
So this is someone within the camera, whoever's holding the camera, within their range or somewhere in the audience.
Yes.
Saying he's got a gun. Someone spots him on the roof right before he shoots.
Right. Right. People are screaming. People are screaming. He's on the roof. It's 60 seconds of them just pointing, and he's just kind of getting set up or so. So it's very, very curious. And I know a lot of people just want to blame this all on incompetence or a mistake or an accident. And I think you could probably put this all on a big spectrum. You know, on the one hand, if you ask, was this intentional, right? There's different versions of intentionality. And did the Secret Service like organize this and text crooks, come out here and shoot the president? No, I don't think that happened. I don't think that they were orchestrating the whole thing on the one side. But on the other side, I also don't think this was just like an accident where we had a magical incompetence fairy just kind of strike a bunch of things one after another so that we ultimately resulted in this terrible catastrophe. I think that the truth is it's probably something in the middle there. And the Secret Service is going to try to run far to this end of the spectrum to say it was just an accident. It was an oversight. It was miscommunication. Nobody's responsible for anything. Nobody's getting fired at all. Whereas if you looked at the Secret Service as like any other company or entity that has caused harm or caused the death or caused gross negligence, there's damages for that, right? People get sued for criminal or for negligence, and there are damages to pay out when people die due to some sort of infrastructure failure. And because it's the government, though, the government protects themselves, right? They've got qualified immunity. The government really doesn't owe anybody a duty of care individually. So cops, right, don't owe you a duty to protect you, to stop being shot in the head, Corey Competore. So it's a position where I think there's clearly some negligence. I would say that it's intentional negligence. They wanted to create an environment where something like this could happen, and lo and behold, it did. And so I hope Congress will ultimately stay on this to push it from that end of the spectrum this direction, because I think that there's a bunch of people in the Secret Service who do not like Trump, same with the FBI, same with Homeland Security, and the Secret Service has already been in a pattern of covering up a lot of other evidence, not only the J6 stuff where they covered up the text messages and the communications on that day, which we'd all love to hear, but they also, remember, covered up the cocaine at the White House. We saw that was there, and there was new reporting that Cheadle and Rowe and others were trying to suppress DNA evidence. They had a partial DNA hit on the owner of that cocaine, and they never investigated that further.
They tried to get rid of the cocaine too.
They did. They tried to shred it, to delete it, right? To cover up evidence again. So you have to forgive us for not giving them the benefit of the doubt and just saying, "Oh, you got bumped by incompetence this time." It feels like you would have been okay with a different outcome here, unfortunately.
Again, over and over again, it's the trust. And of course, this follows on the heels of the whole anti-Semitic rallies on campuses and the presidents of those Ivy League schools. Just same thing, stonewalling Congress, not giving answers. It's the same type of thing. So anyway, Robert Gouveia over at Watching the Watchers has got 400,000 subscribers on YouTube and beyond. Rob, where do we send people to find out more about you?
Yeah, just throw our name in the YouTubes or on the Googles, wherever it is you like to browse. Just type in Robert Gouveia. We should pop right up. We're on YouTube at Rob Gouveia ESQ. We're on X at Rob Gouveia ESQ. We're on Locals at watchingthewatchers.locals.com. We have a great community. We live stream 5 days a week, and we talk a lot about this stuff because it's important.
Yeah, and if this is important to anyone in the audience, go find him, check it out. He digs in deeper than anybody else I know. So it's great stuff. Rob, thanks so much for your time.
Thanks, Greg. Great to be here with you today.
All right.